slide, please. Okay, his first duty was with the 492nd Tactical Fighter Squadron at Lakenheath in England. They had a tactical strike mission flying F-100Ds. So their mission was to stay on alert, to deter the Soviet Union from, any tactical strikes. He arrives in Lakenheath, fresh out of flight training in the F-100, maybe 100 hours under his belt, and they look at him and they go, "You're going to be flight lead." Lucky for him, right? Well, what does that mean? That means that not only is he responsible for himself and flying his aircraft, he's responsible for the 3 other pilots and aircraft in his flight. A lot of responsibility usually given to a more senior pilot, but they just didn't have the pilots at the time, so it was given to him. He took it and ran with it, though. He took it in leaps and bounds. He did a great job as flight lead. He learned a lot, steep learning curve, but he learned a lot from that experience. Fast forward about 5 years. In June, we've got the Vietnam War going on. And Horner, he is sent on temporary deployment to Thailand to fly F-105s. He gets out there, he has a lot of combat experience. He participates in Operation Rolling Thunder. He also comes across SAM missile sites, which this is the first time that aircraft have come across the SAMs, and it's thought at the time that they are impenetrable, that they are the end-all to the aircraft, but it's deemed that, aircraft can avoid them and can escape. Anyways, his deployment is short-lived, temporary deployment. He gets transferred back to the States. The rest of the 60s, well, let's see, he gets sent back to Vietnam as a wild weasel pilot, which means that his mission was to go out and find the SAM sites and destroy them. So, only the ballsiest did it. He got out there and he lived through it, which was amazing. He also was an F-105 instructional pilot during the 60s, a little lower pace, slower than the wild weasel, but still very important. Then during the 70s, Horner goes back to school. He attends the Armed Forces Staff College and the National War College, gets that under his belt, all that training, all that experience. And then he goes on to his first command duty as Vice Commander of the 58th Tactical Training Wing. Going on into the 80s, General Horner has a lot more command positions. He is commander of the 405th Tactical Training Wing. He's commander of the 474th Tactical Fighter Wing, the 833rd Air Division, even the 9th Air Force. Each duty he goes to, there are different challenges to overcome. There are different tasks that need to be accomplished. For example, when he was commander of the 474th Tactical Fighter Wing at Nellis Air Force Base, he had to facilitate the changeover from the F-4 Phantom to the F-16 Fighting Falcon. That meant he had to have all the maintenance crews retrained on the new aircraft. He had to have the entire wing, all his pilots, trained and checked out in the new F-16, both for air-to-air and air-to-ground combat. He also had to make sure that they were ready to mobilize at a moment's notice, because they were a quick response force, which meant they were the first ones called in case of a war. Next slide, please. Okay, now, the 90s come around and what happens? Saddam goes south into Kuwait, and the U.S. rushes over there to make sure that he doesn't go into Saudi Arabia. At this time, General Horner is the CENTAF commander, which means he is the air component commander of Central Command. Now, Central Command is responsible for the Middle East, including Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and it's kind of a joint forces command that takes control of all the forces in the area. General Horner's responsibility is to take control of all of the air component, all the air assets of both the U.S. and friendly nations in the Middle East. So he has a huge responsibility. Pretty much the entire air campaign is resting on his shoulders. But he's in luck. He has had a vast amount of experience with air power. He knows how to use it, how to apply it, which is good. It's actually great. Along with him working with his immediate boss, which was the Commander-in-Chief of the Central Command, General Schwarzkopf, who was an Army guy, they were able to develop a very good plan that allowed, the U.S. to triumph in the Gulf. Some of the ideas that were implemented to help in the Gulf were the use of the Patriot missiles. Now, the Patriot missiles were developed for the Army as an air defense weapon, but General Horner saw that we had better air defense weapons, with other aircraft and stuff, so he reassigned the Patriot missiles as a ballistic missile to use against ground targets, such as Scud launchers, which they did, and it worked out great. He also implemented the idea of push close air support, in which close air support crews would have an area responsibility, with a certain group, but if they were not being used at that moment, they could go off to another area and attack targets there. It was a great system. It utilized the aircraft. There was no downtime for them, so they got a lot done. He also implemented a 4-phase war. The 4 phases were strategic air campaign, in which they would go in and take out the enemy's communications, their supply lines, their transportation systems, pretty much immobilize the enemy, make them useless for the most part. The second phase then would be to gain air superiority, make sure the only thing flying up there was allied or friendly, The third phase was the preparation of the battlefield, and their goal for this was to go in and destroy 50% of Saddam's ground forces before our ground troops went in. And they did a very good job at this. I mean, they went in there with the A-10s, they went in there with the bombers, and they took stuff out. They really did. Fourth and last phase was the ground war, and because of the air campaign and how effective it was, the ground war lasted just 72 hours. All the forces surrendered. Saddam was pushed back up out of Kuwait, and the war was over. General Horner then retired in 1994, just a few years following the war. So in summary, I've talked to you about General Horner's early years. I talked to you about his Air Force career. I also talked to you about his role in the Gulf War. Are there any questions? That concludes my briefing.